Right now, somewhere in this country, a shotgun that's worth more than a used car is sitting in a closet, and the person who owns it is about to trade it in for $100 of store credit. By the time you finish this video, you'll know exactly which shotguns those are, and you'll never make that mistake with anything sitting in your own safe. We're counting down 7 American shotguns that are quietly becoming some of the most valuable firearms in the country. If your family has one of these tucked away, giving it up cheap might be the single worst financial decision you ever make. Stay with me all the way through because the top 2 on this list have sold for numbers that will genuinely stop you mid-sentence. Let's open at number 7, the Browning Auto 5. Ask any serious historian who the most important firearms designer in American history was, and you'll hear one name over and over: John Moses Browning. The man designed the 1911, the high power, the BAR, the M2 machine gun that's still bolted to vehicles in active service today. And yet, when Browning himself was asked which design he was proudest of, he didn't point to any of those. He pointed to the Auto 5. Released in 1902, it was the first semi-automatic shotgun that actually worked in the field, day in and day out, without falling apart or beating up the shooter's shoulder. Browning built a long recoil system specifically for it because the violent and inconsistent pressures generated by a shotgun shell simply didn't play nice with the gas systems being tried in rifles at the time. The barrel and the bolt travel backward together as one unit, then separate on the way forward, the barrel returning first and stripping a new shell into place behind it. That cycling sequence gave the gun its trademark humped receiver, a profile so distinct you can spot one across a crowded gun show without even reading the name on the barrel. It stayed in production, essentially unchanged, for 96 years. Think about that. Almost a century of relevance on a single mechanical idea, at a time when most competing designs were redrawn from scratch every 10 or 15 years just to stay viable. Part of the reason it lasted that long is that Browning refused to license the design out cheaply, insisting on a level of manufacturing discipline that kept the gun consistent across generations of production, something almost no other shotgun maker from that era can honestly claim. The guns collectors fight hardest for came out of Fabrique Nationale in Belgium, where the level of hand finishing, deep bluing, and rich walnut figure is something modern factories simply don't attempt anymore because the labor cost alone would be absurd. Within that Belgian lineup, one gun stands above the rest in the hearts of American hunters: the Sweet 16, a 16 gauge built on its own dedicated frame, balanced in a way that shooters describe the way you talk about an old truck that just refuses to quit on you. Hunters who inherited one from a grandfather often don't realize they're carrying a piece with a documented appreciation curve stretching back decades, not just a family heirloom with sentimental value. A standard post-war Belgian Auto 5 and 12 gauge that was worth around $400 5 or 6 years ago is now trading in the $800 to $1,400 range. Clean Sweet 16s are pulling $1,500 to $3,000, and the rare pre-war A-grade guns with upgraded engraving can sail past $5,000 when the metal and wood carry matching numbers. FN's original tooling from that era is gone. The gunsmiths who hand-fit those actions are gone. What's sitting in American gun safes today is the entire remaining world supply, forever, and that single fact is what keeps the price climbing, no matter what the rest of the gun market is doing. Number 6, the Ithaca Model 37 Featherlight. Specifically the guns built before the original factory shut its doors in 1986. Here's the detail that surprises almost everybody the first time they hold one. This shotgun loads and ejects from the bottom of the receiver, not the side. That single design choice, built around an old John Browning patent that Ithaca had to wait years to legally use once the patent expired, gives the gun a real functional edge. With no ejection port cut into the side of the receiver, there's nowhere for rain, mud, or grit to get into the action from above. That's exactly why police departments loved it and kept ordering it decade after decade. The NYPD carried it. The LAPD carried it. County sheriffs across the country issued it as their standard patrol shotgun. It served through the Pacific campaigns of World War II, through Korea, through Vietnam, where a short-barreled version was issued to Navy frogmen operating in tight quarters along the rivers of the Mekong Delta. Guys who needed a shotgun that would not jam on them when it mattered most. What most people never think about is how many of these guns actually came home carrying a service history. Nobody bothered to document at the time. Department stampings, ground off, unit markings lost to reblues done decades before anyone cared about originality. That's part of why a documented example commands such a premium today, because so much of the paper trail on these guns has simply vanished. The original Ithaca Gun Company folded in 1986. And while the name has been bought and revived more than once since then, nobody who's handled both an original and a modern reissue will tell you they feel the same in the hand. Collectors know precisely where that dividing line sits, right down to the serial number ranges. A decent original Featherlight that was going for $250 to $400 a decade ago is now bringing $600 to $1,200. Documented military and police contract guns, especially the trench and riot configurations with their heat shields and bayonet lugs, are pushing past $1,500 for confirmed examples, with paperwork tying them to a specific department. This is a gun people buy once and never sell because it simply refuses to wear out. And if you ever spot one at a gun show with the original Ithaca markings, that seller very likely has no idea what they're holding. Number 5, the Winchester Model 12. Winchester called it the perfect repeater when it launched back in 1912, and for once that marketing line wasn't an exaggeration. Over its 52-year production run, the company built roughly 2 million of these, and every single part was machined from solid steel. No stamped components anywhere in the design, no shortcuts. The receiver came out of a milled steel billet, and the internal fit was so tight that competition shooters figured out they could hold the trigger back and slam the pump to outrun the cyclic rate of a lot of semi-automatics from that same era, a trick that became something of a legend on the trap and skeet circuit. Gunsmiths who service these today will tell you the fitting tolerances inside a Model 12 action are closer to what you'd expect from a custom rifle builder than a mass-production shotgun house, which is exactly why so many of them are still running smoothly more than a century after they left the factory floor, with essentially zero modern parts replacement. The Model 12 earned its combat reputation in the trenches of World War I, where the short-barreled trench gun version was so brutally effective at close range that the German government formally lodged a protest, claiming it violated the rules of war and demanding it be pulled from the battlefield. That protest went absolutely nowhere, and American troops carried it straight through both world wars. Those trench configurations are among the most valuable military shotguns on Earth today, and collectors who specialize in them will bid well past what an outsider would expect for a documented example. But even the plain field-grade guns are climbing steadily. When Winchester killed the Model 12 in 1964 and replaced it with a cheaper stamped receiver gun, it drew the exact same line in the shotgun world that pre-64 drew for Winchester rifles. And that line has only gotten sharper as more buyers learn to look for it. A standard field-grade 12-gauge that sold for $300 to $500 10 years ago is now bringing $700 to $1,500. Step into trap and skeet configurations, and you're looking at $1,500 to $3,000, and a genuine 28-gauge or 410 bore example can clear $3,000 and keep climbing well past $5,000 at a major auction house. Number 4, the Remington Model 1100. And specifically the early guns built before 1977. Most people think of the 1100 as just another autoloader, the kind of gun your uncle keeps behind the truck seat for dove season. And to be fair, that reputation isn't wrong exactly. Remington has produced more of these than almost any other semi-automatic shotgun in American history since it debuted in 1963. But the reason collectors care goes back to what the 1100 actually solved the moment it hit dealer shelves. Before this gun, semi-automatic shotguns had a reputation for being unreliable, overpriced, or downright punishing to shoot. Remington's engineers cracked the problem with a gas system that bled off excess pressure and softened felt recoil in a way shooters of that era genuinely hadn't experienced before. Within a few short years, it became the dominant competition shotgun in America and stayed there for the better part of 2 decades, while every other manufacturer scrambled to build something comparable, pouring research money into gas systems that never quite matched the softness Remington had already nailed on the very first production run. Here's the part that separates a $50 yard sale gun from a real collector's piece, though. The guns built before 1977 were finished to a completely different standard than anything that came later. Deeper bluing, finer walnut, tighter tolerances, hand-fitted actions that Remington simply stopped bothering with once cost-cutting took over the production floor. Anyone who's handled both a 60s gun and an 80s gun can usually tell the difference within seconds, just from the way the action moves. Some collectors go as far as tracking specific proof marks and barrel dates to pin down the exact month a given gun left the factory, because even within the pre-1977 window, the earliest examples tend to command a small premium over guns from the tail end of that run. A clean pre-1977 field gun in 12 gauge that would have brought around $300 a decade back is realistically bringing $500 to $800 today. Move into the smaller bores, the 28 gauge and the 410 in skeet or trap configuration, and you're looking at $1,000 to $2,500 for a genuinely clean example. Tournament grade guns, Remington's top-tier competition offering, can clear $3,000 without much argument, and there's a hard ceiling on how many of these will ever exist, because the company that built them no longer exists in the form that made them. The factory is closed, and the name has been sold off in pieces. We're just past the halfway point, and every single shotgun on this list so far has doubled or tripled in value over the last decade, while most of the country wasn't paying attention. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you already own one of the first 4, and be honest with yourself. Did you actually know it was worth this much? Number 3, the Remington 870 Wingmaster. Specifically the guns built before 1987. This might be the single most underrated shotgun on the entire list, because with more than 11 million produced since 1950, it's the best-selling pump shotgun in history, and that popularity is exactly why people walk right past it without a second look. But the Wingmaster Remington was building through the 60s and 70s has almost nothing in common with what leaves the factory today beyond the name stamped on the receiver. The early guns were hand-fitted, the bluing was rich and deep, the walnut was hand-checkered, and the internal parts were machined rather than stamped, built by craftsmen who took real pride in what left their bench. Cycle the action on an early Wingmaster, and it feels closer to a fine bolt-action rifle than a working man's pump gun. That difference isn't subtle either. It's something even a first-time shooter notices the moment they rack the slide, which is part of why word of mouth among younger collectors has driven so much of the recent demand. Guys discovering for the first time what their grandfather's gun cabinet had been hiding all along. Everything changed in 1987 when new ownership took over and cost-cutting swept through the entire production line. Stamped parts replaced machine ones, the bluing lost its depth, and the hand-fitting that made the early guns special disappeared almost overnight, leaving collectors with a sharp line they still use to sort the good ones from the rest at gun shows today. A clean original Wingmaster that was a $200 to $300 gun a decade ago is now bringing $500 to $800, with premium configurations like the left-hand models and the 16-gauge variants pushing past $1,000. Remington's 2020 bankruptcy and the closure of the Ilion, New York plant sealed the deal for good. There will never be another Wingmaster built the way these were built, and every year the pool of clean originals shrinks a little more as guns get refinished, parted out, or simply neglected by owners who had no idea what was actually in their safe. Number 2, the Winchester Model 21. This one has one of the strangest business stories in American manufacturing because Winchester genuinely lost money on every single Model 21 it ever built. It was too labor-intensive, too obsessively hand-fitted, and too expensive to ever turn a real profit. And the company kept building it for 60 years anyway, because the Model 21 wasn't really about making money. It was a statement about what American craftsmanship could produce when quality was the only thing that mattered. Production started in 1931, right as the Great Depression was crushing the economy, timing that should have sunk a premium double-barrel shotgun before it ever got off the ground. Instead, it became a legend, championed by John Olin, the man who had personally saved Winchester from bankruptcy and understood exactly what the brand needed to re-establish itself as the finest name in the business. It's worth pointing out that Olin could have easily built Winchester's comeback around a cheaper, faster-selling product, but he made a calculated bet that a flagship built without compromise would do more for the company's reputation than volume ever could. And history proved him completely right. Every Model 21 uses a hand-fitted dovetail and brazing method to join the barrels to the receiver. A joint so strong it needs no external crossbolt reinforcement at all, paired with a locking system built around cone-shaped bolts that actually tighten themselves with use instead of loosening over time. An engineering trick that still impresses gunsmiths who study it today. Winchester built roughly 31,000 of these total, and once regular production ended in 1959, the Winchester Custom Shop kept hand-building them to special order all the way until 1991, each one taking months to finish. A standard grade 12 gauge that sold for $2,000 to $3,500 15 years ago is now bringing $4,000 to $8,000, and the higher trap, skeet, and Grand American grades start at $10,000 and routinely reach $30,000 to $50,000 for exceptional examples. Only 8 of these were ever built in 28 gauge. 8 total across the entire history of the company. Guns like that don't really have a price tag anymore. They have whatever 2 determined collectors in a room are willing to fight over, and that number only ever moves in one direction. And that brings us to number 1, the shotgun every single gun on this list has been building toward: Parker Brothers. If you take away nothing else from this video, remember this name, because most gun owners have absolutely no idea it might be the single greatest investment in the entire history of American sporting firearms. Charles Parker founded the company in Meriden, Connecticut in 1866, right after the Civil War ended. And for the next 68 years, until Remington bought the company outright in 1934, Parker built what a huge number of historians and gunsmiths consider the finest double-barrel shotguns ever made on American soil. Guns that stood toe-to-toe with the best London gun makers of the same era. Remington kept a limited production line running until 1942, when it was shut down for good, so the factory could focus entirely on the war effort. No revival ever came. Every Parker shotgun that exists today was built before 1942, and total production across nearly 80 years landed at roughly 243,000 guns. That number sounds large until you understand the grading structure underneath it. Running from the entry-level Trojan all the way up through VH, GH, DH, CH, BH, AH, AAH, and finally the legendary A1 Special, of which fewer than 80 were ever built across the company's entire history. Fewer than 80 total ever, spread across nearly 7 decades of continuous production. That puts it in the same rarefied territory as some of the rarest coins and paintings in the entire country. What makes the grading system even more interesting is that Parker didn't just vary the engraving between grades. The wood selection, the checkering density, even the internal fitting tolerances all scaled upward as you move toward the top. Meaning an A1 Special isn't just prettier than a Trojan, it's a genuinely different level of mechanical execution. These guns were commissioned for presidents, for railroad tycoons, for the wealthiest sportsmen of the Gilded Age, men who wanted the absolute finest thing American manufacturing could produce and had the money to get it. Annie Oakley shot one. Theodore Roosevelt's own son received a Parker as a gift, and that exact gun sold at auction in 2024 for over $105,000, a number that stunned even longtime collectors who thought they understood where this market topped out. The A1 Specials live in an entirely different universe, with one selling for over $400,000 back in 2006. And a comparable gun today would be expected to clear $500,000 without much argument from anyone who follows this market closely. But here's what actually matters if you're not chasing a museum piece. Even the entry-level grades have been climbing hard for decades. A common VH grade in 12 gauge that sold for $1,500 to $2,500 20 years ago now brings $3,500 to $6,000. Every single year, more of the surviving 243,000 guns are lost to fire neglect and estate sales where nobody in the family understood what they were looking at, and that supply can never be replaced because the factory that built them has been closed for over 80 years and nobody's ever reopening it. So there's the full list. The Browning Auto 5, the Ithaca Model 37, the Winchester Model 12, the Remington 1100, the Remington 870 Wingmaster, the Winchester Model 21, and sitting at number 1, Parker Brothers. Every single one of these guns represents a small window in American manufacturing history when companies chose craftsmanship over speed, a window that closed decades ago and is never coming back, no matter how much money anyone throws at the problem. If you own any of these 7, here are the rules serious collectors actually live by, and none of them are optional. First, never refinish the metal or the wood. Original patina, the honest wear and the toned-down bluing that only comes from decades of real use, is worth more to a genuine collector than a shiny, fresh finish ever will be. A refinish job can wipe out 40 to 60% of a gun's value in a single afternoon. Second, hang on to every scrap of paperwork that ever came with the gun, the original box, the manual, the receipt, even an old hunting license tied to that specific gun. Documentation like that can genuinely double what a serious buyer is willing to pay. Third, before you ever think about selling, get an appraisal from somebody who actually specializes in that manufacturer. Not a general pawn shop counter, not a big box sporting goods store. The gap between what a pawn shop offers and what a real collector will pay is routinely thousands of dollars. And fourth, at the absolute minimum, put these guns into your estate planning and make sure your family actually knows what they're holding. Because the single most common tragedy in this entire hobby is an heir who unloads a $5,000 shotgun for $300 at a garage sale simply because nobody ever told them what it was worth. If you made it this far, you now know more about where the real money is hiding in American shotguns than the overwhelming majority of gun owners in this country. Go check your own safe right now. Look at the markings, look at the serial numbers, and compare what's sitting in front of you to everything we just covered. You might genuinely be shocked at what you've been walking past for years. Drop a comment and tell me which one of these 7 you think still has the most room left to climb. And if you already own one, tell me straight, are you holding on to it or would you actually consider letting it go? I read every single comment on these videos, and honestly, some of the stories this community shares are better than the research that goes into making them. If this one taught you something you didn't already know, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to stay ahead of where this market is headed next, and send this to anyone you know who inherited a shotgun and might have no idea what it's actually worth. That one share could be worth thousands of dollars to somebody. Take care of these guns, keep the paperwork, and pass them down. I'll see you in the next one.